Welcome to the Everyday Millionaire podcast. Polyvagal. I don't know what that word actually means. We're about to find out. But what I do know is that it has something to do with how we handle stress and fight or flight. Dr. Don MacDonald joins me today to talk about at least those three things, what the heck this all means, how we bring it together. Dr. Don, my old friend, good to see you again. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me back on the show.
So listen, Don, and we'll call you Dr. Don. I'll kind of flip back and forth. I mean, let's face it, Dr. Don is kind of cool. It has a certain ring to it, doesn't it?
Just don't call me late for dinner.
Yeah. So listen, the reason is I reached out, I've known you for many years and I have followed you and your journey in business and as a doctor, a chiropractic doctor. You and your wife, Brandi, are doing some amazing work. And of course, I love to bring it in and fold the work that you're doing into this conversation for our listener, because at the end of the day, what you're talking about is health. So as much as the Everyday Millionaire is about seemingly ordinary individuals achieving extraordinary results and creating wealth, we both know that at the end of the day, without your health, the wealth could matter less. So having said all of that, I think the first thing I want to do, fight or flight, that's an interesting point of entry. Stress, that's a point of entry. But I need to know about this polyvagal thing that you have talked about and that I see you talking about, you and Brandi, when you're educating other doctors. So let's start there. What is that? What does it mean? What does it mean to us?
Well, when I went to school, and actually still being taught in school, because this is relatively new, and as we were just talking about before, innovation usually comes from individuals. It doesn't necessarily come from institutions. So often, if someone has a really cool innovation, it has to be like around for a long time before it actually gets into those. And so when I was in school, I was basically taught that the sympathetic fight or flight part to your nervous system only happens when you're like being attacked, and it's bad. And the good part of your nervous system was called parasympathetic, which the nickname for that is rest and repair, or rest and digest, or rest and reproduce, was the good part. So it's kind of like one or two. One was bad, one was good. And again, that it helped us very much to understand a little bit more about our body. But this guy, Dr. Stephen Porges, created this thing called the polyvagal theory through basically studying neonates, and a lot of times when babies were born and they died of like kind of sudden infant death syndrome, he was talking about the same thing. Sympathetic was good, parasympathetic was bad. And one of the doctors sent him a message and said, it's interesting, I found this baby had died, but it was parasympathetic dominant. And is there anything to having too much of a good thing being a bad thing? Like, too much of a good thing is a bad thing. And for Dr. Stephen Porges, that really kind of didn't resonate in his mind. So he really started studying a lot deeper. And he actually found out that the vagus nerve, which is the probably 80% of what the parasympathetic nervous system is, it's a cranial nerve that kind of comes down from behind the, like, it's called the jugular foramen, and goes all the way down the cervical spine, all throughout your thoracic lung cage, right down into your viscera. It has two branches. And so the one branch is called the ventral vagal, and that's the one that's more at the front of the brainstem. And that's the one that we typically thought was the good parasympathetic. Then there's the dorsal vagal, which is kind of the primitive reflex, which is more of like freeze and collapse. And so when amphibians were the first things to develop, they only had like that dorsal freeze. So they didn't have a very big brain, so they could actually play dead as protection when they detected danger, right? Yeah. And then the next evolution was the sympathetics. And so that was like bony fish. So then bony fish could freeze and dart, and freeze and dart. And that was their technique to deal with danger. And then when mammals came along, we developed this ventral vagal, which is actually, it allows us to socially connect with other people, because as humans, we don't have big scary nails and big teeth. And so we can't really survive in the wild solo. And we were designed to be, connected beings. And so in order to be connected, our ventral vagal nervous system has to allow us to drop our defenses so that we can connect with other people. And that's also that healing state of ease. And basically, so it's your neurological safety. It allows you to connect with others. Neurological danger will either get you into the sympathetic fight or flight, or the dorsal shut down, freeze. And so that's why they said polyvagal, because it's the two branches of the vagus nerve.
So when you started talking about that, I was thinking about my recent interview with Dr. Chris Honey, who's a surgeon out of Vancouver. And I'm thinking about what he talked about, how your brain, the brainstem connects to your spine and goes through and does all the things that it does. Anyways, I'm not going to profess to understand a lot of it, other than I do at least conceptually get the whole thing. So why is it important for people to start to have an awareness or understand this at some level? What do we need to be, watching for? What do we need to be thinking about? Where does this support us in knowing more about ourselves, knowing more about our bodies, maybe how we show up, or things that are pushing our buttons, where that fear comes in, perhaps that's part of it. So where does this matter to us as we're listening to you talk about this? What's important for us to know? What should we be paying attention to?
Well, there's three main components to the polyvagal theory, and the first one is the hierarchy of the nervous system, which we just talked about, right? The ventral vagal, sympathetic fight or flight, and dorsal vagal. The second one is going to be what's called neuroception. And so neuroception is a term that means the nervous system is always detecting the environment for danger, because the number one thing priority is to stay alive. And so our neuroception is below our cognitive awareness. So that's why some people, like, they say, hey, how come your shoulders are up by your ears? And they're like, oh, I didn't even know that, because it's just happening subconsciously under the surface, right? So the interesting thing is neuroception will give off cues that our nervous system is not comfortable in the environment. The next thing that's going to happen is our physiology is going to respond to that. Yes. Right? So it's going to respond with tension or ease. And that tells you right now if it's feeling dangerous or safe. The next thing is called interoception. Now, interoception is the ability of a person to feel inside their body. So, like, I don't know, have you done Joe Dispenza's work a bit too? Yeah. So he talks about the feeling, right? So it's about knowing what the feelings are in our body. And so the better we are interoception, the quicker we can determine if we are becoming dysregulated, because the term regulation is a term for our nervous system when we're in a state of protection and we're good. No, not protection. We're in a state of safety. And when we're dysregulated, that means we are in a state of danger, neurological danger, whether it's in our mind, in our body, in our environment. And so that's the whole thing is our goal, and especially as chiropractors. That's why I'm really focusing on helping all of our practice members and helping other chiropractors do this as well, is get people more connected to their body so they can determine if whatever they're doing is firing danger or safety, so that we can become more aware of it, so we can create more ease in the body over time. And so that's the whole thing, is that some people are so disconnected to their body. When I'm doing an exam on someone, we'll say, can you feel this or this? And they're like, nope. Or where does it hurt? And they're like, just hurts everywhere. Like they have no direct awareness of their body. And when you have no direct awareness, it's really hard to get regulated, because you're not connected, if that makes sense.
Well, it does. Number one, as you know, I'm a big chiropractic fan. And even when, as much time as I spend in British Columbia outside of Alberta these days, of course, living out here as much as we do, I've got a chiro that I rely on. And Dr. Wanda is who that is. And these are conversations that she has with me. And that's what I've always liked about chiropractic care is, good chiro seems to be able to relate to people in general and have these kinds of conversations, which I think is amazing. And I'm a huge fan of chiro. I use it all. I go to my chiro on a regular basis, even on a maintenance point of view. But I want to go back to something that you said, and a little bit about Joe Dispenza, Dr. Joe Dispenza, which is the disconnect from that people have from their body, yet it's their body that's driving a lot of what's happening with them, even mentally, right? He talks a lot about, you think it's, willpower, or it's in our head that's driving habits, when really it's our bodies that's driving those habits. That's one aspect of it. And I don't want to oversimplify it or minimize the work that he does around that, but I'm just trying to put it for this context, which is all to say this goes back to what you said, is the breakdown of awareness overall of many people and the disconnect from their body. And you're talking even to the degree of pain, understanding that there's pain, but not even able to identify it specifically or what it might be causing. So am I hearing what you're saying correctly, Don?
100%. And And the other thing I just didn't mention was the vagus nerve, which again, that basically controls your whole autonomic nervous system. It's 80% sensory. So um, it's a lot of that bottom up. Like you said, if we experience trauma or have stress, often it gets stored in our body. And what happens is sometimes as a protective mechanism, we actually dissociate from our body, right? This is a good thing to know, like just personality styles. That when I always ask my patients, I said, if you get under stress or you determine there's some kind of danger, do you have a default to elevate, like to elevate up and like let's get going or kind of get rocking, or do you actually shut down and collapse? Because a lot of people, we learn this as growing up. Like say if you're a child and you're growing up and you learn that it didn't matter what you did or how much you fought back, nothing's going to make a difference. Sometimes people will default into the dorsal state. And so if you can, like, this is about self mastery, if you know that, then you know that if you're in a stressful situation and like I have a tendency, you already are there. Like we actually need some sympathetics because the sympathetics are good because sympathetics gives us energy, excitement when you're with people, especially in a state of connection and safety. That's like basketball. When I play basketball, it's playing hockey, it's playing sports, it's like being connected, like playing wrestling, like those things are
Mhm.
all sympathetic dominant, but in a state of safety. Um,
Mm.
Dorsal again is shut down, but dorsal is also not necessarily bad because if it's in a state of safety, that's like connection, cuddling with a loved one on the couch watching TV. It's being intimate. It's like breastfeeding with mom, like mom and child. It's like it's just hanging out with some good friends, having a beer. Like those are dorsal in a state of safety. But if we understand kind of what that's why these things are, it's kind of like the algorithm of the human body. And if we can understand that, we can actually have better tools to help us to get back to that regulated state.
It's interesting you bring that awareness part of it up. I know that when I walk in or come into, step into, or chaos erupts in front of me, something chaotic happens, something, maybe even some version of an emergency, my, I automatically, this is what I know, my heartbeat speeds up, but everything else slows down. And that comes from training to say, do not go into panic mode, go into slow things down so you can see what's happening mode. And that was really came from many, many years ago. The one quality that my dad had was there was never any panic. He moved
Mhm.
quite quickly when he needed to in certain situations, and he trained life saving and all sorts of things that he did back in those days. But it was taught to me early on is that don't go into panic. And I have noticed that of myself over the years, and it's not like I'm in those situations a lot, but I just know that when things are chaotic, I and or is there is some state of emergency, I've come across an accident, whatever those rare occasions are. But the point is, I feel my heart rate elevate, but the rest of me slows down, and that's an interesting component of the awareness that you kind of just described in that scenario. So whereas you also see people that just lose their shit. They get into panic mode. They're like, they lose their minds. And it's like, okay, now I got to calm that person down so they don't make the situation worse or hurt themselves. It's like that kind of thing. And I think some of it, as I rant on here a little bit, is I'm thinking because of over the years of working and training horses, is of course,
Mhm.
horses are they're either fight or flight. And man, oh man, when they move fast. And when they react fast. And, as a trainer, you can't buy into that. In other words, when they go into fight or flight mode, we have to actually turn our energy down. So, is this the way I'm hearing it? Is that would be along the lines of what you're describing? Is that accurate, Don?
Yeah, and I think that would be a little bit more of self mastery because because your default might be going like going into sympathetics, but you're actually bringing yourself back down, and
That's
actually,
awareness of the body. Is like I guess my point of that would be is that goes back to that awareness of body, awareness of state, even. So that is, I guess, some mastery around that. But is to say that what you've discovered as a doctor is that that's not a normal thing for people in general.
yeah, and I think that, and that's the thing is that you should be. I think of these all like gears. Like think of them like gears, like ventral vagal, stress,
Got it.
dorsal in safety, not. And if you are if you've been in a pretty healthy state, you're able to change gears pretty quick because you're
Yeah.
aware. Like you will be conscious. Like, ooh, my heart's going. let's breathe. Like, and you're doing that instantly, right?
Yeah.
Some of these are just default. Like some people who have not really been aware of themselves just run off default settings. And so if
Mm.
they're gonna run off the rails sympathetic, they're gonna lose their mind, run around like a chicken with their head cut off. If they're default dorsal without self-awareness, they'll just
Yeah.
freeze and they're just like they won't do nothing. They won't even answer you. They're just like you see
So
that
tell me,
sometimes in like trauma movies, right? Where people freak out and they just don't like you're like run and they just don't even
yeah,
run. They just stay there.
those are good movie hooks. So,
Yeah.
okay, so let's talk about you and the work that you and your wife, Brandi, are doing. And because there's a part of this is that it's unique enough that you're actually taking it out into the world of other chiropractic doctors. And you're teaching this. You're traveling the world. You and Brandi are doing some really, really cool stuff. It's fun to watch, and have watched you grow over the years. Knowing the many conversations that we had early on in both our businesses and what we were doing. So, give me a little bit of insight into the uniqueness of this, and then your thought process around getting out and teaching it, and sharing it with other chiropractors. So let's talk about that from just even a business model perhaps, or what it is that the messages that you're trying to or wanting to get out there.
Yeah, I think I was just coming up with a good idea to describe it, and I call it like the Ghostbusters of chiropractic. And so the Ghostbusters has four Ghostbusters, and they all have that little machine that would like shoot to the ghost, and then it'd catch the ghost and put it away in that little thing, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so there's four main streams in chiropractic that we can really help with. One is being very good at chiropractic adjusting, like understanding how to analyze the spine and nervous system. And because chiropractic adjustment is very similar to like playing a sport, skating, playing hockey, shooting baskets, like it's a physical sport. And again, most pro basketball players, they shoot practice all the time. So being very good at detecting verbal subluxation and being very good at adjusting, like that's the first stream, which is super important. The second stream is understanding the hierarchy, which we just talked about. Like we want to know about those three states. The third one is going to be about neuroception, which we just talked about. And the key thing about neuroception is that not only that's just us detecting our environment, that's us detecting other humans. And so if you are not only a chiropractor, but if you're a business owner and you have staff or you have family members and you're giving off bad vibes, literally, like if you're dysregulated, you're actually giving off danger signals to other people around you, which will actually trigger them without you even saying anything. Okay, that's why when someone walks in a
And
room
they
and you
may
say,
not even recognize it either. They're just getting a
no,
bad vibe. Is that a fair statement?
100%. They just be like, well, some people, I say, you just meet them and you just like, now I'm in a bad mood. I have no idea even why. They just walk by you. It's like their energy just got on you. But it's like the nervous system has a language that is below our awareness. And it's just, that's why we're connecting with other people. And so that's why we're really talking how important it is for chiropractors or business owners or family members or anybody in life to work on staying regulated, because you just become a nicer human and people have a better experience in your presence, period. Doesn't even matter what you're doing, but it just amplifies or it detracts anything that you're doing. So as a chiropractor, it will amplify your adjustment, or if you're distracted and frustrated, it actually takes away from your adjustment. So it actually will maximize or minimize anything that you're doing or talking with staff. The
So, so if I'm, yeah, so this makes total sense. But if I'm, okay, so got it, and that's cool. Now, if I'm a patient and I'm coming in
Mhm.
and I got something going on for me, I'm not even sure what it is. Maybe I'm in pain. Maybe I'm just feeling discomfort. Maybe I've had some chiropractic care in the past and walked away feeling better. And now I want to go back to that. If I'm coming in and you're assessing me, or I'm doing a self assessment that's saying I got to get in and get an adjustment, what am I feeling? What am I sensing? What is it that I'm walking in the door and saying to you, or what are you as a doctor who maybe I don't have that awareness, or looking at it and assessing, going, okay, I got to make a couple of adjustments here? You follow what I'm asking there?
yeah, because a lot of times they don't know because they just come in with whatever they think that I have a shoulder pain and that it just floats outside their body. And so what our job is actually just to kind of like just link a few things up. So we'll the first thing we always link is posture, because posture is a great global sign if you're in a chronic state of protection or growth, because it's just the end result. Are we open? And that affects all different parts of our body. The second thing is there's something really cool. It's called the social engagement system. And the social engagement system is made up of 5 cranial nerves that control facial expression, eye movement, smell, your voice, your hearing, your head movements, and then that whole vagus nerve that controls your whole autonomic nervous system. Now, the interesting thing about it is if your body is mostly in a state of protection or detecting danger, it turns down your social engagement system. So some people will call it the RBF, resting bitch face. Like when some people have that non-expression on their face.
Yeah, yeah.
And so
That's me,
often
by
what
the
we
way. I'm often accused of that, and my team teases me about it when I'm in a meeting. Somebody will deliver some good news, and then they'll look over at me and they'll go, "Oh, that's Patrick's happy look, by the way." I guess. Anyways, they joke about it, but anyways, we digress. Go ahead.
but so often what we do is we just actually take, and when they come in, not only we're like doing posture evaluation, might send them for x-rays, but we're also taking pictures of their face.
Hmm.
Because automatically when we're regulated in our nervous system, we actually become more social. Like, and
Mhm.
you can actually see it in their eyes. Like you could actually have them picture side by side. And actually multiple people, when they're under care, their family members notice that they're more enjoyable to be around. And
Oh.
so and they might have just, I've had lots of patients too, once we've explained this, they go, geez, yeah, I've been, because you get bad kickback. Like if you're giving off those danger cues on your face or your energy, and you're trying to get stuff done with your business or with your family, and they get turned off because they're detecting danger, then your response back is bad neuroception from them, and it's almost like a cascade. Like it goes downhill. And the opposite happens too. If you see someone, you go, hey, how's it going? And then they're like, I'm great, how are you? And then you're like, oh, that's kind of nice, I'm doing pretty good. And then all of a sudden you start go cascading up. And so
Mm.
it's about kind of like evolving, collaboration, rather than devolving, because devolving is when you're like bad social cue, more of a jerk, and it kind of goes down the hill. So I think our job as chiropractors is to be able to link that, and find out what's important to them in their lives. Like there's lots of people where there's their business, they like to play sports, their moms, they're looking after their kids, they all want to be better. Like I don't know anybody who wants to be worse at whatever they love to do. But
Mhm.
when they realize that if you're regulated, you can more have control over your emotions, you can have better connections with others. Like they're like, that's what I want.
Well, so there's lots to talk about in what you just shared. Number one, my mom turned 96 and she's in extended care, which just means she's got a condo. She goes down for breakfast or lunch, and she basically they look after her. There's a so, but she's pretty self-sustaining. The point of that is that she's the social drive that that's where senior citizens. Back to your point around, we need to be social. It's a very, very important part of what we do and how we operate. So that's
Yeah.
something that we got to be aware of, I think, in what I heard and what you said. But having said all of that, there's another part of it, which is that sense of well-being, and going in, getting adjustments. That becomes also a maintenance thing, because that's what I'm not great at with chiropractic. We often wait for something to be wrong as opposed to being preventative and going in for an adjustment once a month or whatever it might be. So I want to say that out loud. Although I do pretty good, I'm way better than I was, and it makes such a huge freaking difference. That's the point. I'm not going in because I got something wrong with me. I'm actually going in because I want to make sure that everything stays aligned and that everything runs down your spine and that everything, all that nervous system is happening. And then I want to touch on something that we kind of let in a little bit with Don, which was stress.
Mhm.
Now, I have a phrase that I use often that says it's not the weight we carry that breaks us down, it's the way we carry the weight.
Mhm.
Now, that's to say that we can carry stress heavy and we can be bummed out about it, and or we can say, okay, well, got it, I have that, but I'm not going to carry it, I'm not going to let it weigh me down. Having said that, stress will eventually break us down. And is this part of, here's, I'll share my own kind of story. When I go to my chiro and I get my adjustments and stuff, things just seem better.
Mhm.
My mood gets better. I feel a little bit more energetic. I feel in a better mood. And I don't carry stress really heavy anyways, but
Mhm.
tell me a little bit about the impact of stress on all of this.
Well, that's great because that was the fourth thing from the
Ah,
Ghostbuster thing, which
nice segue.
was it's called co-regulation. It's perfect. And that's why I said I like the analogy when they had that the big monster in Ghostbusters, and they said don't cross the streams, because when they cross the streams, like it's super powerful. So if you cross all four of these streams, it's super powerful. Anyway, that was just my image. I always think in pictures. So, but the thing is that we need other people to help co-regulate, because even if we're stressed and we don't have regulated co-regulators in our life, like that's the thing, is if the more co-regulators we have in our life that are regulated, that helps us to dial it back down, because there are lots of self-regulation activities we can do, like exercise, meditation, hot baths, like write stuff down, do all that kind of stuff. But nothing beats just connecting with another person that you trust, that you feel safe with. And that's one of the biggest powerful things I think about chiropractic is that a patient comes in, you as a chiropractor are their safe regulator. Like I have, and especially as a male chiropractor, like just, well, that's because I've only experienced being a male one, but the power of being a safe male co-regulator, especially for females. Like there's some females, like I've had patients come and say, you are the only safe male in my life,
Mm.
which is huge, because the power, that's actually what helps to just get you more regulated, because it's not like you're regulated or not regulated. It's like tuk, 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 but it's like more of a scale. So like you said, you look after yourself pretty good. So maybe you're only like 20% dysregulated when you go in, but you get that adjustment, you co-regulate. It just helps you just to get, boom, reconnected. Your social engagement system comes back up online. Like your blood pressure
Mm.
goes down, like it regulates your breathing, your digestion go like that is just, it's like a reset. And so that's why I always
Yeah.
tell people it's super important who you hang out with, because you need to have safe co-regulators to be able, because we all need someone to lean on at some point. Like that's the thing, is stress is never going to end. And that's why I think, like you said, it's not how you get the stress, but how you carry the stress. Multiple people can have a lot of stress, but some people, like if one person has a nice safe co-regulator, and this can be your wife too, your wife or your husband or your partner, um, and they can help you reset right away, then you just move on. But those people who unfortunately stayed at home, maybe even during COVID, and they're still staying at home, they become more neurotic because they have no connections. When they get stressed, they don't have any way. They have hard, like limited ways to get re-regulated, and that's why it ends up lasting longer and longer to recover.
So, when we think about what's going on in the world today, where I don't know what the actual number is, I don't know that anybody really knows, but they throw it out there where 30% of the population didn't go back to an office environment. They're working from home. That might be a bigger challenge than people are even realizing, in that if you're not in that environment, you may not have that co-regulator, the term
Yeah,
that you use. I want to unpack that a little bit more, but that
yeah.
could in fact be what's causing some of the increase in depression and the increase in stress and the health issues that come along with that, because you and I both know that our physical health, our physiology and our physical health is a reflection of what's going on often
Hmm.
mentally and how we're handling stress overall. And would that be, do you think, an accurate statement, Don?
Oh yeah. It's huge. Like
Yeah.
I even say, like in my practice, for example, people who got negatively impacted from COVID, like health wise,
Hmm.
was like some of them got sick for a day or two, but like it was very little. Like
Yeah.
none of even my whole practice, none went in a hospital. Out of thousands of patients, nobody went in the hospital and nobody died. But 100% of them got affected from being isolated. Like,
Mm.
and I don't think actually anybody did not get affected. Even some of my like introverts that like don't like people, they're like,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, I loved it the first couple weeks, but
Yeah.
even for me, that was a little bit too much.
Yeah. 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 So let's talk about. I've actually not heard the term co-regulator. So, or what that even means. So, but it's something that you said, which is very interesting, which is if I have, as a coach and as somebody who's been in this space of coaching for many years, and I have heard, people have said to me before, hanging out with you is, I just love it because I feel so much more grounded. So I hold that because, and especially women, And I'm fortunate that way. And a lot of that has to do with my wife, Stephanie, and what she's shared with me in terms of my own insights and being aware in it. But if you were to say to somebody, be a good co-regulator, like be intentional about it, be that space for people. Is it as simple as being able there to listen? It's the classic case of the husband that wants to fix everything instead of just listening. Like we joke about that, but is that an example of being a good co-regulator? Like, how would we describe that if you're going to give somebody some guidance? If you want to be that, what would you be saying to them?
Yes, so good. Because even when we work with chiropractors, everyone's like, "What do I do? What do I do?" And again, this is the actually what do I be, and this is 100% what do I be. And so the interesting thing is understanding how co-regulation starts is because as humans we cannot survive as a baby, like we cannot survive on our own, and so babies require safe co-regulators in order to grow and mature ideally, right? And so if someone has gone through their whole childhood and they've never really had a safe co-regulator, often they don't know what it feels like to feel regulated, which is going to
Mm.
make them harder. It's going to make it harder for them to be a strong co-regulator. So if we make sure that we look after our regulation and becomes super intentful about keeping ourselves regulated, then we automatically become a better co-regulator because it spreads, right? And so that's that neuroception. If I'm dysregulated, I spread dysregulation. If I'm regulated, I spread regulation. And so for us, it's just important to be able to, like you said, to go back to the Joe Dispenza stuff, is get the feeling. Like we got to know what the feeling is. And even it's funny, after a first visit, when I ask people, like we do use postural tension tests, I put them up against the wall, standing in perfect posture, and I have them feel different areas of their body, and they just feel tension all the way through. And after their first adjustment, some people actually even feel emotional because they're like I've never felt that before. Like
Mm.
I've never even felt whatever that they can't even say it. Like you even said, I just feel different. And some
Yeah.
of them are even emotional because it's actually overwhelming sometimes because they've actually been dysregulated their whole life and they don't even know what it feels like to be regulated. And so
Uh-huh.
so that's the
Dude,
cool
this
thing
is so
is
fascinating. So
you can't
fascinating. I
you
love
can't
it.
give away what you don't have, and so that's why
Yeah.
it's important for us to make sure we work on doing what we can. And then if we find other people, like how you said, people feel comfortable around you. And again, that's why I loved hanging out with you and masterminding with you too, because if you find people who you can hang out with and then you feel better afterwards, you want to hang out more with them because that will help
Yeah.
you be more regulated, which will help you be a better co-regulator. So it just kind of like passes it down the road, if it makes sense.
Well, it's interesting something that you're talking about here, Don, and I, you mentioned, babies, for example. So we've probably most have had that experience where, a new baby, and it's all cool and cuddly, and then somebody picks it up and it breaks out screaming, and then they pass it on, and the next thing you know, it all settles down again. And
Yeah.
it is that, to your point, it's really energy, isn't it? It's some
Yep.
version of energy, and if you, like you said, if you grew up in an environment where that co-regulation wasn't there, you don't even know what it is.
Yep.
You're going to be taking that kind of, that's what that's how you show up, that's how you occur. And of course, a baby who's looking for that co-regulation, who's looking for that safety and wants to be, is going to feel that energy right away. And I think that probably happens with pets as well.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, because
Well,
pets really feel energy, right?
I forgot to say too, like pets are great co-regulators as well, because another being, like another being
Yeah.
that's calm and with you. So again, that's why too, a lot of seniors, even if they get animals, like their life expectancy goes up, their health improves, because again, we're designed to connect with another being. It's just that if you don't have a human that's safe, often your pet would be safe. That's so good because when you just mentioned the passing the baby, because it's funny when you do like stuff like Joe Dispenza's work, or when we're working the stuff, even with chiropractors, we're trying to get them to label their feelings, or determine what their feelings are. And because we've learned to not listen to those because we follow the rules, people don't even, they can't even like mention or describe what their feelings are. While babies, they only have feelings. And
Hmm.
when they're growing up, we've had this tons of times, like especially with women, for example, if you have a girl, like a young girl who says, go hug your uncle, and they don't feel comfortable hugging their uncle,
Yeah.
and they force them to do it anyway. In their mind, they kind of learn that what I feel isn't worth it or isn't important. And so, and then throughout as you get older, then you have to like learn to unpack that and reverse it, because what you feel is important, right?
Yeah.
But it might have been taught out of us when we're younger.
As I'm thinking through this, because I automatically go into coach mode, and Stephanie and I do a workshop called Clarity Equals Velocity. And sometimes it's hard for people to identify, when we talk about clarity equals velocity, it's a kind of a cool, catchy phrase, but what
Mhm.
does that even mean? And then when you start to understand where clarity or lack of clarity lives, it is actually in a scenario like this, when you've got individuals who are not feeling okay. There's something underlying. They're not connected to their body, like you say.
Yeah.
There's even a conversation around clarity in that physicalness of all of this, that co-regulation or lack thereof. And I'm
Yeah.
going, wow, I'm going to have to get you out and speak at one of our events, because I think it's a cool conversation. I think it's so important, because when I play into this and really work in this space, personal and professional development, elevating and being your greatest self, living your best life. This is all part of these really big conversations. And I think they're really important conversations, because we go back to what we said earlier, is health doesn't necessarily need to show up as I'm so sick that I'm in bed. Health
Yeah.
is also mental health. It's a sense of well-being.
Mhm.
And that sense of well-being is really kind of permeates your whole life. Are you feeling joy? Are you feeling some happiness? How many times have you had conversations with people go, I'm just kind of bummed out. I don't know why. I don't even
Yeah.
know. It's not even that, it's life's pretty good, but it's like, I'm just bummed out. And
Mhm.
when you start to maybe unpack that a little bit, this could be an exact conversation that people need to have, or the kind of treatment that somebody might want. I don't know. What's your thoughts on that, Don?
Well, it's funny. Well, Brandy, my wife explains this way better than I do, and we just uploaded a couple of videos on our YouTube channel called the Informed Chiropractor. And so, if anyone wants to listen, there's some she has like 3 different co-regulation videos, which are really cool. They help to explain a little bit better. But we just had like a reevaluation from one of our prax members, and we just said, "Have you noticed anything different after being under care?" And they said, "Well, it's just weird. Since I've been under care, like I knew I should stop, but I never did in the past. But I've stopped vaping, and I just started exercising, because it's funny when you become connected to your body. Often you'll just start doing things to look after it better, because it's easy to neglect your body when you're out floating outside your body, when you're like dissociated. But once you get connected, it's kind of like in your house. Like if you're renting someplace, it's easier to kind of trash the walls and not look
Yeah.
after it, keep it dirty. But when you bought your first house, like you're like doing the yard, you're like cleaning all the rooms. Same thing. It's like if we're like in our body, it's like we want to look after it because it feels like our body. But if we're disconnected, like you just kind of haphazardly go through your life.
Well, I think that's it's interesting that you bring that up. So, of course, you and I have both, spent years training and looking after our bodies pretty good. Now, I came off the rails a little bit over COVID. And uh, what I've done recently is got back into my training regimen and got my weight back down to where I'm comfortable and feeling good about it. And really set some goals, as a 65-year-old male, I've kind of want to really up the bar and keep it high and all the rest of it. But one of the things that I did was I quit drinking.
Mm,
And it's not like I had a drinking problem. I don't. I just said, no, son, why am I drinking? And it's been months since I've had maybe a half a glass of wine along the way, but really, I don't remember the last time I had a drink of anything. I don't even think about it anymore. And when I go to social events, it's like, people who know me just know that I don't drink. It's like really interesting. My point of
mhm.
all of that is that that's had some pretty interesting and profound effects. Now I've done so many different things in terms of cleaning up diet and exercising and all the rest of it. I can't put my I can't say, well, I quit drinking and all of a sudden this is this. But all I know is that all of those things, to your point, have really played into my own mental well being, my own general mood, my state, uh, because nothing else has changed. I mean, I have all the worries or concerns of any business owner and all the rest that goes with it.
Yeah.
But how I carry the weight has changed because I carry it totally differently now because I'm, again, looking after the house, if you will. I think that's the way it is, and it affects my mental state. Any comments on that?
Well, it's chiropractic used to always call the three T's, or the toxins, is thoughts, toxins, and traumas. And so any of those go in your body would create subluxation. And so it was a very simplistic model to explain, and then it
Mm.
was actually very easy to defend because people would not understand it. But now, if we say safety cues or danger cues, which are emotional, physical, or chemical, into the body, are going to either help you become more regulated or help you become more dysregulated. And so, anytime you take toxin into your body, it's automatically going to get you to be more dysregulated. And the really interesting thing about this is all those cranial nerves that make up the social engagement system, all are basically, they attach right in the brainstem. And the brainstem is like kind of like this, the opening door, the trap door to your prefrontal cortex. And your prefrontal cortex is where you have all your great ideas, and is your personality, and when you're creative, and all those kind of things. And also in impulse control too, like even impulse control, like all that stuff is all through the prefrontal cortex. If we're detecting danger, whether it's the physical, chemical, emotional, it turns that off. And so we have a less capacity to tap into our prefrontal cortex. And so high performers will notice this quite a bit, that if they do drink, they lose their capacity for a couple days, and they're just not as good. And so you just be like an athlete. If you just want to kind of keep raising the bar, often some people will end up doing that, or really decreasing the amount of even bad food too, like bad food, drugs, alcohol, like all that kind of stuff are all danger cues going into our nervous system, which is taking us offline, which is taking us further away from our human imperative, which is to be creative and innovate and collaborate.
Dude, I love this conversation so much, Don. I mean, you're reminding me of a few things that I think I take it for granted that I know that I often don't share in the environments in, I have a men's group that I work with called Shift Men's Group. My point of that is that when you think about toxins, so for example, in spite of the research that says a glass of red wine is good for you, it doesn't mean like 6 glasses of red wine are good for you. It doesn't, more is not
Totally.
necessarily not necessarily better, right? But the point is that when what I've noticed is this. So number one, the drinking part of it for me is like, okay, I'm done with it, and I'll maybe pick it up again at another time. I don't know, but right now I'm not
When I want to be
interested.
less productive, I'll pick it. No,
Yeah,
just
yeah, I
kidding.
want to be less productive. I want to be in a bitchy mood. I don't know, but there's something else is that my diet is also really cleaned up. Now, I don't generally go too far off the rails diet wise, anyways, but I had started to. And here's the thing now is that when you get into those social situations where, I mean, there's some good food on the table, but it doesn't mean it's good for you necessarily. Now I experience when I go off the rails on in those scenarios, I actually experience a food hangover. Like I wake up the next day and I go, holy cow, do I ever feel like crap? And I wasn't drinking, and I know that it was the food, whether it be a little bit of overeating, too much sugar, just the wrong food because of the environment I was in, and
Mhm.
without a breakdown of whatever willpower you might want to use. My point is that as well to something else you said earlier, which is being so careful about who you surround yourself with, or even what you're listening to. Certainly since pandemic, and given what's going on a global macro scale, in my world, I'm doing economic research all the time. And I got to
Mhm.
tell you, dude, there's nothing good about that research because when I look at economically what's going on, it's mostly okay, that light you see at the end of the tunnel, it is a
It's a
train
train.
and it's coming down the track, right? So
Totally.
my point is that it can really bum me out and go, how do I, number one, I do the analysis, I do the research, and then I got to share it. But I don't want a doom and gloom world is coming to the end, because it's not. We will deal with all of this. How do we best deal with it is the question. But my
Mhm.
point around all of it is that it's so important, I think, to consider what we are handling mentally, emotionally, toxic, whether it be alcohol or drugs or shitty food, and
Yeah.
or who are we feeding our soul with in terms of the people that we hang around with? Are those
Mhm.
people there to light you up, to inspire you, to pump your tires? You know, it's interesting, the psychology around things, and I want to share because I'm sure you've experienced this. Maybe something's happening, it's you're feeling the stress, you got pressure on you, and somebody looks at you that loves you and cares about you and says, "You got this." It's just them pumping your tires, but psychologically it
Yeah.
goes, "That felt good. Okay, I got this," right? It is interesting, don't you think?
Yeah. Well, and it's there, and then also you could have someone who says you got this, and they're throwing off danger cues, and it's like actually makes it worse. Like it's like when you get
Yeah,
that
yeah,
false, the false. It's like the old car salesman thing where it's like they give you compliments, but they're totally not coming from a state of safety, like a
yeah,
neurological safety point of view. But yeah,
totally.
100%. Like that is huge.
So these are all things that I think the awareness in our own kind of health, when we look at our mental health, our physical health, they kind of go together. Now, do you, in your world as a doctor, being a chiro, understanding nervous system and all those things, does one supersede the other? In other words, is looking after your mental health more important than looking after your physical health, vice versa? Because we both, and you and I've had these conversations, is that mentally when you start to break down, it shows up physically, and physically when you start to break down, it shows up mentally. Is there a priority? What should we focus on?
Well, as a chiropractor, like we're not counselors, right? So we're not gonna roll down the road of counseling. And the interesting thing is, if someone's had trauma, whether it's physical, emotional, chemical trauma, like any trauma in their body, the interesting thing is that when we have this approach, we don't necessarily need to dive into what the trauma was, but
Yep.
because that whole autonomic nervous system and that vagus nerve is 80% sensory, like it's body up. And so if we can work at putting safety cues into the body, releasing tension, creating ease in the body, that opens up the trap door to our prefrontal cortex. And often when we open up the trap door to our prefrontal cortex, now we can actually process things better. Like now we can actually, because there's sometimes where people just kind of they can kind of make better decisions, like hang out on their own. Like I said, I've never been trained, like besides like personal development stuff where you're trying to change mindset to challenges. I find like the chiropractic approach is the bottom up
Mhm.
approach. And probably the adjustment from the above the atlas that we always talk about is just giving the possibility, like opening up the possibility, saying that the way that things have been going for you doesn't have to keep going. Like we have no idea what the potential of your body is and your nervous system and your life. Like nobody knows. But right now you're like a dirty, I always call it, you're a dirty light bulb. You're just a dirty light bulb. The light is in you. Like the light's still there. We just got to
Mhm.
start cleaning off all the crud that's on top of it so that it can shine. And so that's kind of how we can work through it, because it's almost like you get a trauma, it stores in your body, and then you dissociate, and then it just stays there. It's like a hoarder in a house where they just took a bunch of junk and put it in a room and just left it there.
Mhm.
And until we start
Yeah.
to unpack it, like it just stays the same.
So when I ask the question, when I go back, physical, mental, it's more a case, Don, of, first off, I think everybody should go in and get assessed and do some chiro. I think it's just, I believe in it that strongly in terms of what it can do with the right chiropractor. Not all chiro, like any doctor, I guess, like not all chiros are created equal. They're certainly not Dr. Don's and Dr. Wanda's.
Well, and
There's,
as a caveat, this is brand new information, and so I'm
yeah,
teaching this to chiropractors, and like again, we haven't even heard of this before. So, like, don't expect this to be all the to everybody you go to. And actually,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
some
Well,
chiropractors
no,
might even think this is crazy what we're talking about. So, just so you know.
that's a really no, that's a really, really good point. But I'm thinking that from a self-assessment, if somebody's listening to this and, what would be a message in terms of self-assessment? There's a couple things I want to touch on next, but I want to, like, if somebody's looking and thinking about their general health, I mean, there is a place where they may physically not be feeling well, but underlying all that is just environment. It could be what you're eating. It could be the people you're hanging around with. We often talk about the naysayers, the energy hogs, the dream killers. There's those individuals that walk into a room and light it up, and there's those individuals that walk into a room and suck the energy out of it. And
Yeah.
a lot of that comes with, I think from my perspective, one of the big signs around all of that is, where was I going with that thought? I just lost my thought. Shit. It was like, so the, oh, sorry. It was around when we don't realize sometimes that we're in an environment of individuals, people, or that are coming in, that they're victims to everything.
Hmm.
That victim attitude, that something's always happening to me. There's always a source outside of myself of what's happening. And if we can be immersed in that, and the next thing you know, physically, we're at the effect of that. I don't know if you have any comments on that, but that's my own observation, is that it's easy to find and be drawn into that world of everybody's doing something to me, and maybe it's the government's fault and the government needs to fix it, and my coworker is this and my job is that. There's a lot of this victimness that can happen that actually manifests itself physically. Any comments, any experience around that your observations, Don?
Yeah, I think I always like to get people starting with movement because the thing what can we do? Because again, the whole key to get this whole thing started is to get you connected with yourself. Like that has to be the awareness before anything can start. And so one of the easiest things that we can do is just start going walking. A lot of people in their life, they if they're in this environment, they actually numb themselves with social media or eating or drinking or like all those kind of things. But those are numbing activities to help keep you dissociated. And so if you just go for a 20-minute walk, or you just start with just moving your body, because again, this nervous system, 80% sensory. So we need to have some input. Like if there's no movement, there's no information. And then you're just all lost in your thoughts. If we can start with moving our body, and doing that over a consistent time, like I think walking 30 minutes a day is funny. One of my mentors had said, if you were to put all the benefits with like basically no negative side effects, it would be like the world dream drug of the world. Like it would be the top
Yeah.
selling drug, helps decrease chances of dementia, arthritis, diabetes, cancer, basically all those things, is just by starting to move your body. Plus, you're also starting to connect with your body, which also is helping you to become more regulated. And it also gives you time to think and not be just, because you can't be connected and think about your life and think about what your goals are if you're just distracted all the time.
I share with you, is that in my gym, in my home, this a few years ago, I got it. I got a really high end kick ass rebounder.
Cool.
And I am hooked on rebounding because there's no excuses for getting my body moving. And I got to tell you, I don't like going for walks in the rain. So then, of course, I come up with all sorts of excuses. But with my
Mhm.
rebounder, I can actually just walk. I can go and I can do 10 minutes on the rebounder, or I can do 30, depending on what's going on in my day. And if I crank the tunes, I can go even longer. But it really is an interesting activity. And I find it as impactful for me as walking. Now, I want to
Mhm.
just get your read on this, because there's something about walking that you said that brings it back. So my mom, 96 years old, totally sound mind. Her body's breaking down a little bit, but ultimately she's good health. The one thing my mom always did was walked. She would
Mhm.
walk a lot. And when she was 95 or 93 years old, she was still walking a kilometer a day kind of thing. My point is that there's a difference that people don't understand, and that is the difference between wellness and fitness.
Mhm.
Walking, to me, I've talked to different docs about it, including Dr. Chris Honey, who I was sharing with you earlier on.
Yeah.
It is really magic, is that wellness lives in walking. Fitness doesn't mean you're well. You can be very fit and not well,
Yep.
but
100%.
you can be well and not fit, in the context of you're not going to go run a half marathon or a marathon. And I think that's important for people to understand, is that we sometimes measure ourselves against, whatever TikTok or YouTube or Instagram, abs and blah, blah, blahs and all the rest of it. No, just get out and walk. It's huge.
I totally agree because you'll see those guys that live like again, like we just had like OJ Simpson just died. Like you hear about all these athletes and they all die in their 60s and 70s, and then you might have someone who might not be the picture of fitness, but they
Yeah.
walk like you said every day and they're like 100 years old or whatever. Like you just,
Yes.
I totally agree. Like it's definitely balanced. Or people will say, "Oh, I can't believe that person had a heart attack. They run all the time," and I'm like, but you can't judge your book by its cover. Like that's and then but they use that as an excuse. See, doesn't even work. Exercise doesn't even work. So he even had a heart attack and he exercised.
Yeah, and the thing about wellness too is that when we talk about walking as wellness, there's a physical wellness to it. But back to your point, what you said earlier is actually taking time out of your day where you can actually think. And even if you're listening to a podcast or maybe playing some tunes while you're going for a walk, that also is there is a mental wellness that goes along with all of that. And so I wanted to shine a light on it because I think it's an important conversation and a good reminder for anybody listening still that these are things that really matter.
Hmm. They are. They are.
Um, now, tell me something is that you mentioned earlier, Don, around trauma, and I just want to touch base on the trauma thing. Is that physical trauma is, there's the apparent, okay, I don't know, I was in a car accident, I got whiplash, and I was, months getting fixed. And, you can relate to that, then eventually it goes away. But your body may still hold on to that trauma. Or maybe you're out having fun on a weekend. I don't know, you're water skiing and you take a tumble and you really crash across the water. And there's some trauma in that in your body that you may not even be aware of. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you got a cracked rib or anything, but your body in that moment of tension or in that moment of crashing and bashing around, and it can carry that trauma for quite some time. Would that be an accurate statement?
100%, because I always talk about global trauma as like the whole system, and then segmental trauma. And so often you can have just segments of the body that are in a state of protection. And often because the rest of our body is moving around, like it just stays frozen in that time. And over time that definitely can develop chronic stuff. Like I've had lots of people who've like been like in a whiplash accident or something, and then they said, and then it wasn't too bad. And then all of a sudden, 5 or 6 years later, they start getting all those problems, and we get
Mm.
sent in for X-rays. And they have degeneration all through, like because it set it in motion. And if things aren't addressed right away, it's just like all problems. They kind of left in the back. They just kind of fester away and get worse and worse over time.
Yeah, interesting. So you and Brandy have been literally traveling the world, dude. Like I follow you guys along your way on Facebook, et cetera, as you do your posts and talk about your trips. I don't even know how you run your practice, given that you're traveling a lot. I'm just joking about that, but you're traveling a lot. You're
Yeah.
sharing these educational kind of insights with other chiros around the world. Is Do you feel like you're having? Here's what I'm getting in all of this, right? Is that you're wired, you and Brandy are wired to be a contribution, to make a difference. I mean, that's what lights you up. And as you travel around the world, do you feel like you're having an impact? Do you think you're making a difference? And are Kairos receptive to this? Because, like you say, this is kind of, we'll call it a little bit of cutting edge thought process. And
Yeah.
how is the reception to it?
Well, like I said, the cool thing is when you try something innovative in your own practice, and then you get some really cool results, and people are like, I had a patient call it snap magic the other day. Whatever you do, it's snap magic, and I'm like, well, that's kind of
That's kind of cool.
interesting, but there's one thing to just get some really great results with your own people, but it's also amazing to be able to share that message with another chiropractor, have them increase their confidence in what they're doing, and have them get these great testimonials back of how they're responding with their patients as well. And like I said, we're just starting because we don't have we have a pretty good tribe. Like I think we've got chiropractors in our group from about like 10 different countries, and we're just heading to Australia here in a month. But like yeah, but we just got started because we only started doing these technique seminars about a year ago, and so I think we've only had about 100 chiropractors go through the process so far out of 100,000 in the whole world. So the ones have gone through it, they really like it though. So far we've got some really good feedback.
That's cool. So when you look down the road, you can see this as something that you can have a pretty big impact. I mean, I look at it and I go, the exponential impact that you have, even with the 100 Kairos that are maybe in your tribe or however you want to describe that. I mean, it has a pretty strong impact, in terms of what it will mean to others, because it spreads from that really quite, I guess, in a really epic kind of way when people are starting to feel better. And there's just never there's never enough of that to go around, I guess, in all of it when you say that way.
Well, and I think too, like because we said, if not only people feel better, but then their social engagement system comes online, so they actually become nicer humans. And so the cool thing is, we are helping to seed the earth with less hunchbacks and more nice humans. So those are kind of inspiring to me, because people under chiropractic care that are regulated more often, in general, just regulated, more socially connected, are just nicer people to be around. And I can't remember. I was interviewing one chiropractor, and I can't remember. He was just mentioning this stat, is that when you're really nice to somebody, because you authentically feel good, and you kind of what you do when you meet with somebody and they feel in a better mood when they leave you, they that positive footprint goes on something like 6 or 7 other people. And so it spreads pretty fast. And so that's
Yeah.
pretty cool. So it's not even the direct correlation or the impact that you have, but it's the impact on the impact on the impact. And so I think it's just in today's world where there's so much diversity and like trauma in the economy and politics and wars and everything else going around. And I think it's kind of nice to be able to, you know, just be the light for some people in this crazy world.
Well, that's so, I love that thought process when again, it comes back to the awareness of how you show up, who you're being, and, what is it what is the mark you want to leave? In business, when I often use the term, mind your wake, understand that as how we show up in business. And I use that as the analogy, mind your wake, which is in the world of marine. Anybody, if I say to somebody that owns a boat, mind your wake, they know exactly what I'm talking about. So when they're leaving the marina, they're leaving slowly. They're not leaving a big wake that's tossing the boats that are in the marina all over the place. They're
Yes.
actually being responsible for the wake they leave. And I think as we show up as individuals, as business owners, as we show up as a member of the family, it's mind your wake. And some of that is taking responsibility for how you show up, the energy that you bring in. Do you want to be that individual that is the light in the room, that brings the energy into the room, or are you going to be that individual that sucks the energy out of the room and dims whatever light is in there? And I really, that is a conscious thing, and that is a choice. You can actually choose to be that way. And so when I'd like to bring that to people's attention is like, mind your wake. How are you showing up? Are you that person? And if you're not, then that's a good point of entry to say, okay, I got to go and see what's going on for me. Why am I being bummed out? Why am I not feeling happy? Why can't I have more joy in my life? That's a body of work that, of course, that you do. And you've been on that journey for many, many years as well, in terms of showing up and doing the work. Now, Dawn, you and Brandi are, that light. You're that energy. That's how you show up. You train that way. Uh, that's your intention. How much of that is, when I say intention, how much of that do you spend, or how much time do you spend in terms of training? So, for example, I'll talk to many guests on the podcast and I'll ask them the question, you're obviously a good leader. Do you train to be a good leader, or is it kind of more nature than nurture, or is it more nurture than nature? So when you consider the body of work that you do, how you're showing up to say, I'm going to take this on and train other chiros in this body of work and be challenged by it and do all the things. How
Mhm.
much study do you do? How much of it is because I get coached, I do training, I read voraciously, whatever it is for you? How is that for you, Don?
I think it's massively amplified. Like, since in the last year, for example, last year and a bit, since I started doing more training, because Brandy, she's spoken around the world in chiropractic for like 15, 16 years. She's been doing it for a long time. And she wanted to have me start teaching techniques. So I just started doing about a year and a half ago. And in that, I discovered I have dyslexia.
Hmm.
I never even knew I had dyslexia until after, and I'm
Wow.
like, I can't like just reading stuff. I always was a slow reader, but like just realizing I had that. Um, and my adjusting skills have gone through the roof. Like I'm like in 2 years, like because I have to like really become super aware. Like we talk about self-awareness. Now when I'm adjusting people, I need to, because before I just close my eyes and you just be like kind of you just do it. And then people would say, well, what did you do? And I said, I just did it. And it just was better. But then you can't teach that, right? Like how you're supposed to teach that. And so like you have to break it down, and then you're always like coming up with ideas with our group. Like if people are having questions or don't understand it, you have to go, okay, what are better ways I can explain it, or what kind of analogies can I use, or and then it, like even last night I'm just like looking up on rotator cuff stuff because I'm doing an extremities course. This is my level 3, and so I'm like half like watching hockey, and then I'm watching like rotator cuff stuff, and then I'm watching hip rotation stuff and nervous system stuff. So I think just by kind of extending myself, putting myself like way outside my comfort zone, because like I never really ever wanted to teach other chiropractors how to adjust, or give them tips on adjusting, because like it just feels weird, because they should already like they already know how to do it. Like why would I don't want to tell them they're doing anything wrong, um but I am finding that just because like I guess my creativity is I've kind of like taken all the different techniques that I've learned before polyvagal theory, and I've kind of created my own. And I think my goal for a lot of the chiropractors I teach is for them to take all, not to be a Dr. Don, but just to take all these different things, but have the permission to be creative, um,
Mm.
and make it your own. And yeah, and so just it's actually been way more study. It's way more work doing this than just doing my own thing.
Well, what's interesting about all of, you talk about dyslexia, and I can't even tell you is that I don't know a lot about dyslexia. I have a fundamental basic understanding at best. Stephanie had dyslexia. She grew up with dyslexia. She also grew up in a time where she was actually left-handed and was forced to learn
Oh,
to be right-handed. Weird as that is, but that was those days. And as many guests as I've had on the show, I'm starting to look at dyslexia and I go, some people maybe look at that as a curse. And I got to tell you that I look at it and go, everybody I've talked to has turned out to be a blessing because it fires their brain differently. And I got to say, it's funny that, the fact that your creativity is where it's at. And then you share that, you figured out that you had dyslexia. I'm going, well, that makes total sense to me based on all the other stories I've heard from so many, is that it's a blessing, not a curse. And it's just bonus when you actually figure it out. And then all of a sudden, everything has a different view. You have a totally different view of the world. So I don't know where I'm going with that. I just wanted to share that insight because I've talked to so many guests who are so creative and so accomplished. And somewhere in there, they go, oh, yeah, no, I grew up with dyslexia. And then I learned about that. And then this changed. And I'm going, oh, isn't that fascinating? So the fact that you just shared that is kind of cracks me up a little bit. So,
yeah, it's funny. Just oh, and by the way, yeah.
yeah. So there, you were blessed. No wonder you're so damn smart and
Oh,
creative.
that's
So,
funny.
Don, you've been very generous with your time. I appreciate it so much. I think that I love this kind of whole conversation, and because it
Mhm.
really opens up the door for people being aware and being responsible for their health, and not waiting to have to go to a GP and go into this world of drugs and pharmaceuticals. And I'm blessed at this point in my life where I got none of that stuff going on. And I think it has a lot to do with, number one, having the awareness to manage and understand where stress lives and how it actually shows up in your body. Number one. Number two is being able to actually take responsibility for our health and being aware of what's going on and paying attention and listening to conversations like this. I mean, I'm blessed to have the opportunity to know individuals like you and have these kinds of conversations. What's it called again? No, I've lost the phrase already.
Co-regulation.
Co-regulation. So there you
Yes.
go. I got great co-regulators
Go,
that I have
yeah,
access
totally.
to.
That's awesome.
I'm going to use that one a lot. I'm going to be talking about co-regulation. I'm going to be
And I'm
tapping on
stealing
your
your
phone
watch your
call.
wake. I'm stealing that one too. Watch your wake. I love that one.
Yes, exactly. Watch your wake. So, what is the kind of message that you would want to get if there's a Cairo listening to this? or anybody that wants to get a hold of you, we'll put whatever links you give us, we'll put it in the description. But what's a kind of a final message, any profound guidance that you would want to give somebody listening to this, whether they be a chiro and or just an individual who's trying to look after their health?
I find that if you can make sense of what you're experiencing in your life, it just makes it so much easier. I've had so many conversations where people are like, "It's just in my head," which is funny. It's actually in your body, but like it's just not connected. Or like even the dyslexia thing. I think that was part of the increased awareness because I had to teach. I had to become more internally aware, and then I realized that, which was nice because then I could switch my teaching style because I'm not good at like orally reading stuff out, but I can describe a picture really good, and I'll just be a lot less stressed in that. Well, and so increasing that awareness of myself and understanding myself just allows me to do the things that I want to do more. Because before I used to think like in my head, you're always trying to go like, oh, I hope someone doesn't make me read because they're going to think I'm stupid or whatever. And so that runs in your head the whole time. And then it limits everything that you do, and it creates a
Mm.
whole bunch of stress, and it shuts off your social engagement system, and it dysregulates your autonomics. Like there's like so much stuff, and so I think finding safe people to be around, like nobody's perfect. Everybody has tons of challenges. Everybody is like
Mm.
dealing with stuff all the time. It's not like when you get someplace everything's going to be perfect. I think it's just finding a safe place to fail, basically finding a safe place to fail. Um, and then being encouraged by that. So then it gives you more permission to try new things. Because if you don't have a safe place to fail, you're never going to try anything new. You're never going to
Mhm.
extend yourself. You're never going to try to find out what the possibilities are because it's too dangerous to in case you fail. When I think 99% of everybody who innovates fails like 99% of the time. They just
Yeah.
it's okay. It didn't work. Try something different. Like let's do it again.
Move on. It's another thing to do. It's interesting around for me is that, I'm blessed. I'm so blessed. I don't get sick. I don't even remember the last time I had a cold. I'm going to say 4 or 5 years ago. But even when something is happening where I do feel physicalness, like something, a pain, an ache, a headache, whatever, if I should get that, it's interesting is that the first question I ask myself is what's going on for me? What's
Yes.
going on for me? Like what's going on mentally, emotionally, I spiritually, I always internalize what's happening for me when it comes to any kind of physical ailments. That's just kind of how I've become wired over the years because I believe so strongly in that and have lots of evidence of it in my life, outside of my life with people I know. And so, have you read the book, by the way? And then we're going to wrap it up, or I'll be here all day talking to you. Have you read the book Extreme Ownership with Jocko Willink?
I have not read it, but I have definitely heard of it.
You got to read it, dude. You
Yeah.
got to read it. And this all goes back to extreme ownership. And when I look at extreme ownership, and you can talk about what is happening in your life, I often use the phrase is because I believe it is that your life and what's happening in your life is a reflection of who you're being, the choices you're making, or the decisions you're not making, all decisions, by the way. But your reflection is just a reflection of, or your life is just a reflection of who you're being. So if there's some aspect of your life you don't like, don't look outside of it. Look at you. Go look in a mirror and go, what do I need to change? Who do I need to attract? How do I got to show up differently? Do I got to be a more powerful self regulator? I
Yeah.
think that's the answer right
Right.
there.
Yes, it is.
That's the answer right there. Dr. Don, I want to say thank you, my friend. So good to catch up. And thanks for joining me on the show. And folks, go to the links, reach out, check out Dr. Don's site and what he's got to share. And Don, thanks for your time. Say hi to Brandi for me.
I will. Thanks, everybody. Nice talking to you.